Preston didn't just uninvite his brother. He humiliated him first in public in front of the wedding staff. "You'll ruin the aesthetic," he said, straightening his rented tuxedo. Marcus said nothing. He simply let his coat fall open just enough for Preston to glimpse the card inside. 3 weeks later, that same card funded a $150,000 reception. It paid for a rented tuxedo. It paid for a $20,000 flower order. Preston never once questioned. Have you ever watched someone dig their own grave in real time? One purchase at a time, Sarah did. She stood behind the desk, watching every charge, saying nothing, printing every receipt. Let me take you back to the beginning, back to the lobby, back to the exact moment Preston thought he had won everything. He hadn't won anything. He had just triggered a federal investigation. He had no idea.
Hold up. He stole the numbers, completely unaware of the trap. Let's rewind.
The lobby smelled like roses and money. Cut flowers stood stacked 3 feet high. They choked the air with sugar and stem water. Underneath that sat a heavier note. Expensive perfume sprayed twice, worn by people who never asked the price. Marcus Whitlock, 34 years old, stood near the coat check. His hands stayed in his pockets. He worked as an IT support technician for a mid-sized logistics firm. That was what his family believed. His jacket was worn faded 3 winters old. The left cuff had frayed down to loose thread. In his right pocket sat a phone. The screen was cracked corner to corner. A spider web of white lines crossed his own reflection. He had carried that phone for 2 years. He had never once replaced it. Preston Whitlock crossed the marble floor like he owned it. He was 31 years old, a self-described entrepreneur groom in 6 days. His white tuxedo was rented. It had been pressed that morning. The tag still hung faintly visible at the collar if anyone looked close enough. Nobody looked that close. His hair was gelled flat. His smile was already loaded before he opened his mouth. "Marcus," he said the name like it tasted bad. "We need to talk about Saturday." Marcus didn't answer right away. He watched his brother's shoes instead. Italian leather borrowed from a friend who owed Preston nothing and who would never get it back. "About the seating," Marcus said. "Or the flight. About you not being there." The words landed flat in the marble lobby. A woman near the reception desk looked up from her clipboard. She looked quickly back down. Sarah Malone was 26 years old. She was the venue's junior event coordinator 3 weeks into the job. A cardigan hung over the back of her chair. It smelled faintly of coffee she never had time to finish. She kept her eyes on the paperwork, but she kept listening anyway. "You can't be serious," Marcus said. 6 words, no more. "Dead serious." Preston adjusted his cufflinks, a habit he repeated whenever he wanted an audience to notice his hands. "This is a 500-person event, Marcus. Every photo matters. The aesthetic matters." "The aesthetic?" "Don't make this weird." Preston's voice climbed a register. The rehearsed calm slipped just slightly. "You show up in that jacket next to people who make more in a bonus than you make in a year. What does that say about us, about the family?" Marcus said nothing. Silence from him had always unsettled Preston more than shouting ever could. It was the kind of silence that had weight. It pressed on the chest of whoever stood closest to it. Preston shifted his weight from one rented shoe to the other. "Say something," Preston said. "There's nothing to say." "See, that's the thing about you." Preston stepped closer. He lowered his voice like he was doing Marcus a kindness. "You never fight for anything. You just stand there broke, quiet, invisible. It's actually kind of sad." Behind the desk, Sarah's pen stopped moving. Marcus reached for his coat folded over his arm. He let it slip. It fell open across the floor between them, the inside pocket turned outward. A corporate credit card slid halfway out, embossed letters catching the chandelier light. Preston's eyes moved to it before Marcus had even bent to pick it up. "That's a nice card for a broke IT guy," Preston said. He was already reaching for his phone. "It's for work expenses." Marcus knelt. He gathered the coat. He tucked the card back inside. His hands steady and sure did not shake. "Company property." Preston didn't answer. His thumb was already moving across his screen. One photo taken and gone. The shutter sound was swallowed by string music drifting from the ballroom doors. He slid his phone back into his tuxedo pocket like he had just won something. "You're not invited," Preston said one final time in case the first version hadn't landed. "Don't show up Saturday. Don't call the venue. Don't embarrass this family any more than you already have." He turned. He walked back toward the ballroom chin high. His shoes clicked against the marble like a metronome counting down to something. Marcus stood alone by the coat check. He did not look devastated, angry, or even surprised. He looked patient instead. It was the look of a man who had already read the last page of a book everyone else was still starting. His phone buzzed once in his pocket. He pulled it out. The cracked screen threw his reflection back at him in 6 broken pieces. A single alert sat on the display. 3 lines of internal text meant for exactly one recipient. He read it twice. Then quietly he tagged it. It fell under a classification he had built himself 2 years earlier, one he had hoped he would never need. Tier 1, corporate honeypot. Status armed. He put the phone away. He picked up his coat, calm, unhurried, steady. He walked out through the side entrance, past the valet stand, past the roses. The parking lot air was cold, and it didn't smell like anything expensive at all. Sarah watched him go through the glass doors, her pen still frozen above the clipboard. She didn't know his name yet. She didn't know what she had just watched. She only knew the exchange had felt wrong in a way she couldn't yet name. It was the kind of wrong that made her keep a receipt a little longer than she needed to. The receipt was from his brother's floral order. Preston, certain and careless, never once wondered why his quiet brother hadn't fought back. He never wondered why the card had been so easy to photograph. He never wondered why Marcus hadn't snatched the coat back off the floor, not even for a second. He was too busy admiring himself in the ballroom mirrors. He was too busy rehearsing his toast. He was too busy being certain that the aesthetic was finally perfectly his. He thought he had gotten away with something small. He had no idea. He had just fed the first line of code into a trap built for exactly this moment. The server room smelled like stale coffee and warm wire. Marcus Whitlock kept it that way on purpose. 3 monitors glowed against the dark. They were the only light in a windowless room he rented month to month above a shuttered dry cleaner. A space heater ticked in the corner. Somewhere behind the wall, a fluorescent tube buzzed. On and off, on and off. It couldn't decide whether to work. He sat down at 9:14 p.m. He did not turn on the overhead light. He never did. The chair he used was secondhand, bought 5 years earlier. The leather had cracked along both arms. Beside the keyboard sat a mug chipped at the handle, coffee gone cold since morning. Marcus didn't drink it. He kept it there out of habit. Some men keep a photograph on a desk. He kept a cold cup of coffee. He logged into the encrypted terminal, 3 passwords deep, a rotating token generated by a keychain fob older than his phone. The screen blinked awake. Rows of transaction data scrolled down the left panel, a live feed tied to a corporate account. He monitored it for exactly one reason: fraud detection. It was his actual job, the one his family had never once asked about. At 9:31 p.m., the first charge landed. $5,140.72. Category Bakery Custom Order. Merchant Chantilly Rose, a wedding cake studio 2 counties from the venue. Marcus watched the number sit on the screen. He did not reach for the decline button. His cursor hovered over it 3 seconds, then moved away, deliberate, calm, unhurried. Most fraud analysts would have killed the charge on sight. Marcus did something else. He opened a secondary window, one built entirely by him over 14 months of quiet after-hours work. It was a classification framework nobody else at the firm had signed off on. Nobody else understood it. He tagged the transaction. Not declined, not flagged for review. Log time-stamped, routed into a folder labeled with a case number instead of a name. Federal Corporate Wire Fraud Tracking Instance 0091. He typed 3 lines of notes, precise, unemotional, the kind written for a courtroom, not a diary. Then he sat back. His phone lit up on the desk. The cracked screen caught the blue glow of the monitors. A message came through on an app with no icon, no name, just a blank gray bubble. Confirm instance active. Marcus typed back 2 words. Active. Watching. The reply came in under 10 seconds. Good. Don't touch it yet. He didn't ask who was on the other end. He never did. Not in writing, not anywhere a record could exist outside the one he controlled. Whoever it was, they trusted his numbers more than most people trusted a signature. At 9:47 p.m., a second notification appeared. This one came from a different system entirely tied to Preston's personal banking app, not the corporate feed. Marcus wasn't supposed to have access to it. He had built the access himself 6 months earlier. Back then, he still believed his brother might one day need saving from something smaller than this. Preston's screen, mirrored quietly onto Marcus's second monitor, showed a single line of green text. Payment approved. Chantilly Rose. $540.72. Underneath it, seconds later, Preston typed a message to someone in his contacts. Marcus read it without blinking. Told you the card would work. Nobody checks these things. Marcus almost smiled. Almost. He didn't laugh. He didn't gloat. He watched a small green checkmark blink once on Preston's end. That checkmark confirmed a payment already recorded 3 separate times. Once by the bank, once by the venue, once inside a federal tracking instance Preston didn't know existed. The fluorescent tube behind the wall buzzed again longer this time before falling quiet. Marcus leaned back in the cracked leather chair. He looked at the number on the screen, small against the corporate account balance. It was small, too, against everything Preston still had left to spend. But this was never really about the number. It was about the pattern the number would build, one purchase at a time. Each one a fingerprint no lawyer could argue away later. He thought about the lobby. He thought about the word aesthetic, the way Preston had said it like a verdict. He thought about Sarah's pen, frozen midair behind the reception desk. None of that mattered right now. What mattered was the folder growing 1 entry at a time, patient, silent, exact. By morning, there would be a second entry. By the weekend, a dozen more. At 10:02 p.m., he closed the laptop halfway. Just enough to dim the glow. Not enough to lose the feed. He picked up the cold coffee, held it, set it back down without drinking. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the street below, the only sound for blocks. Preston believed he had won something. He believed he had beaten a system too slow, too careless to notice a stolen number sliding past a 5-figure wedding budget. He had no way of knowing that every swipe he made was sliding into a case file. Every approval notification he screenshotted, every message he sent bragging about it, only added another line to a file with his name already typed at the top. Every dollar spent was another nail in a very expensive federal coffin. The planning office smelled like laminated cardstock and hairspray. A ring binder sat open on the desk. It was tabbed in gold foil letters, platinum package stamped across the cover. Somewhere down the hall, a printer chewed through a stack of seating charts. It worked 1 page at a time, steady as a metronome. Preston Whitlock walked in without knocking. He wore sunglasses indoors, pushed up into his gelled hair, a habit he'd picked up from men he wanted to be mistaken for. He dropped into the chair across from Sarah Malone like the chair owed him something. "We're upgrading," Preston said. "Everything. Top tier." Sarah pulled the folder toward her. She opened it. She clicked her pen twice out of nerves more than intent. "The current package is already the second highest tier we offer." Second highest isn't highest. The Platinum package runs $150,000 total, including catering and the floral upgrade you mentioned last week. "Good." Preston smiled, easy, certain. "Money's not the issue anymore." Sarah looked up. 3 weeks ago, this same man had haggled over a $200 tasting fee. Now he was waving away 6 figures like it was pocket change. She didn't say that out loud. She wrote the number down instead, careful exact the way she'd been trained to. "I'll need the card on file updated," Sarah said. "Whose name should I put down as the primary holder?" Preston barely glanced up. Just put mine. The card ending in 4471, the one used for the cake deposit. It's not registered under your name in our system. It came through as a corporate account. It's a business card. Preston waved a hand dismissive, already reaching for his phone. Company reimbursement thing. Doesn't matter whose name is on the plastic. Money's money. Sarah paused. She typed the quote almost word for word into the notes field of the client file. It was a habit she'd developed after 3 years in event coordination, watching things go wrong that nobody wrote down in time. Money's money. Doesn't matter whose name is on the plastic. She didn't know why she saved it. She just did. I'll also need to add the floral upgrade, Preston said. The imported arrangement. White orchids flown in from overseas, the ones from the catalog on page 40. Sarah flipped to page 40. That arrangement runs $19,980. Do it. $20,000, Preston, on flowers. You heard me. She hesitated for exactly 1 second, pen hovering above the authorization line. Then she processed it. Questioning a client's spending wasn't part of her job. Not on paper, not out loud. Even so, it felt strange. The card ending in 4471 cleared instantly. A soft chime rang from the terminal. Approved. Preston leaned back, arms crossed, watching the screen like it was a scoreboard. See? Told you money's not the issue. Sarah printed the receipt. She watched it slide out of the machine, warm curling slightly at the edge. She folded it once, then again. She slid it into the inside pocket of her cardigan, not the client binder where it belonged. She told herself she'd file it properly later. She didn't fully believe that, even as she thought it. You should be thanking me, Preston said, standing, adjusting his sunglasses back onto his nose. Half these vendors have never seen a wedding this size. I'm basically doing them a favor. Sarah didn't answer. You get it right. Preston looked at her, waiting the way he always waited for people to agree instead of just letting silence sit. This is the kind of wedding that ends up in magazines. I'm sure it will be memorable, Sarah said, carefully neutral. Preston took that as agreement. He always did. He left without saying thank you. The office door swung shut behind him. The printer down the hall kept chewing through its endless stack of paper. Sarah sat alone for a moment. She opened her desk drawer, the bottom one, the one she kept locked with a key nobody else had asked about. Inside sat a growing stack of receipts. The cake deposit, the venue upgrade fee, now the floral order, each one printed, each one folded, each one hidden for reasons she couldn't fully explain to herself yet. Only that the mismatched name on that card kept circling back through her mind at night. She closed the drawer. She locked it. She sat for a moment longer, staring at nothing before turning back to the next appointment on her schedule. By the end of the week, the total charged to the card ending in 4471 had crossed $43,000. It crossed a threshold, one that turned a careless swipe into something with a legal name attached to it. It became a number large enough that no prosecutor would ever call it petty. Preston never once wondered why a wedding coordinator kept photocopying his receipts twice. He never wondered why she filed some copies loose in the binder and hid others somewhere he never saw. He was too busy imagining magazine spreads. He was too busy picturing himself in white orchids and rented silk, certain that money solved every problem it touched. The champagne flowed at the tasting that evening. Glasses clinked somewhere down the hall. The sound was warm, easy, celebratory, and it completely masked the sound of a federal trap snapping shut one signature at a time. Marcus Whitlock's apartment smelled like wood smoke and cold. The radiator wheezed in the corner, tired, old, unreliable. It fought a losing war against a draft that came in around the window frame. No landlord had ever bothered to fix it. A single lamp burned on the side table. Everything else stayed dark. He sat on the couch alone with a bowl of reheated soup. The spoon sat untouched. Steam rose off the bowl and faded into nothing. Across town, the rehearsal dinner glittered inside a private dining room at the Camden Hotel. Roses again stacked in low crystal bowls down the center of a 40-foot table. Perfume drifted between courses, heavier with every glass of wine poured. Preston Whitlock stood at the head of the table. He tapped a fork against his glass until the room quieted. "To family," Preston said, raising his glass toward 22 relatives. Every one of them had at some point asked why Marcus wasn't there. The people who show up. The people who matter. Nobody at that table asked the obvious question out loud. Preston had made sure of that days earlier with a short, practiced explanation about aesthetics, stress, and keeping the night simple. Marcus's phone buzzed on the couch cushion beside him. He picked it up. The cracked screen lit the dark living room in pale blue, a group text thread 23 names deep, minus his own. It was still visible only because Preston had never actually removed him. He had only muted the ability to reply. A photo loaded slowly on the cracked display. The rehearsal dinner table, gold candlelight, everyone smiling, glasses raised. Preston had captioned it himself. "Missing someone tonight? Nah, we're good." 3 relatives had already replied with laughing emojis. An aunt had typed something about how peaceful the night felt without any drama. Marcus read it once. He set the phone face down on the couch cushion. He picked his spoon back up. He ate 1 bite of soup, gone lukewarm now. He set the spoon back down again. He did not reply, defend himself, or explain. He did not need to. Outside, the wind pushed against the window. It rattled the old frame in its track. Marcus pulled the blanket over his knees. He sat very still, the way he always sat when the noise grew loud enough that silence became the only honest response left. At 9:52 p.m., a different message arrived. This one came through the encrypted app, no name, no icon, confirmed. Final catering balance staged for wedding night, $41,780, same account. Marcus typed back 3 words. "Understood. Hold position." The reply came a moment later. "You holding up okay?" It was the first personal question the contact had ever asked him. 6 months of exchanges, and this was the first one that didn't read like a case file. Marcus looked at it for a long moment before answering. "I'm fine. Just watching." Eleanor Voss had signed her name to exactly nothing in 2 years of communication with Marcus. Not once. Not even in the earliest emails back when he'd first flagged the framework that would eventually become tracking instance 0091. She used numbers instead of names. She used case codes instead of a signature. Marcus had learned slowly that this was simply how federal directors operated when a case mattered enough to keep quiet. He'd looked her up exactly once years ago. He never mentioned it. Not to her. Not to anyone. He set the phone down again. Calm, quiet, unbothered. The group chat kept buzzing on the couch beside him, message after message. The family kept circling closer around a version of the night that didn't include him at all. He didn't open it again. He didn't need to see the rest. Somewhere in that dining room, 40 miles away, his mother was probably laughing at something Preston said. His uncle was probably raising a toast to the happy couple's bright self-made future. Nobody at that table had asked where the money for the imported orchids had come from. Nobody had asked why a groom who'd been complaining about rent 2 months ago was suddenly paying for a 5-course dinner without blinking. Marcus understood something that night he hadn't fully let himself understand before. Nobody was going to ask. Nobody wanted to ask. The family had built an entire wedding, an entire version of Preston on a foundation none of them wanted to look at too closely. Looking too closely might mean admitting what kind of family they had chosen to become. He picked the spoon back up. He finished the soup cold now, without complaint, without ceremony, without a single word spoken aloud. He thought about calling someone. He thought about it for exactly as long as it took to remember there was no one left in that family who would believe him over his brother. So he didn't call. Not that night, not the next morning. He sat with the silence instead. It held him the way it always had, patient, steady, unbroken. The rehearsal dinner ended just after midnight, 42 toasts deep. Every glass sat drained. Every plate sat cleared. The whole room laughed at a joke about Marcus's absence. One nobody at that table would even remember making by morning. They laughed at the empty chair. They never once noticed the weight of the man who wasn't sitting in it. The groom's suite smelled like rose water and starch. A rack of white tuxedos lined one wall. Each jacket had been pressed within an inch of its life. Preston Whitlock stood in front of a triple mirror. He adjusted his bow tie, watching 3 versions of himself from 3 angles at once. "You look good, man," one groomsman said, leaning against the door frame. "I know," Preston said, flat, certain, already bored of the compliment. The mirror caught the gold cufflinks at his wrists. They were engraved with his own initials, a gift he'd bought himself 2 weeks earlier. He turned sideways. He checked the fit of the jacket. He adjusted a cufflink that didn't need adjusting. "Seriously, though," another groomsman said, "how'd you afford all this? The venue upgrade alone had to be, 6 figures?" Preston smiled at his own reflection before answering. "Let's just say I made a few smart moves." "Like what?" "Offshore crypto." Preston said it easy, practiced the way a man says a lie he's told enough times to believe it himself. Got in early on a coin nobody else was watching. Cashed out at the right moment. Timing is everything. The groomsmen exchanged a look, half impressed, half skeptical. It was the kind of look men give each other when the math doesn't quite add up, but nobody wants to be the one to say so. "That's insane," the first groomsman said. "You should teach a class." "Maybe I will." Preston adjusted his collar again. "Some of us just know how to make money work. Not everybody gets it." In the hallway outside the suite, Sarah Malone stood with her clipboard pressed to her chest. She stood close enough to hear every word through the half-open door. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She'd only stopped to check the room number before knocking. Now she couldn't make herself walk away. Offshore crypto, cashed out at the right moment. She thought about the receipts locked in her desk drawer. The cake deposit charged to a card registered under a corporate account, not Preston's name. The floral order, $20,000, same card. The venue upgrade over $100,000, same card again. None of it matched a crypto story. None of it matched anything Preston had just said. Sarah's hand tightened around the clipboard. She flipped back quietly, careful not to let the pages rustle. It was the intake form she'd filled out during their first meeting weeks ago. There, in Preston's own handwriting, sat a name he'd listed as an emergency contact for the wedding party. Marcus Whitlock. Brother. It was the same name Preston had once described loudly in that very lobby as broke invisible in embarrassment to the family aesthetic. Sarah stood very still. Her breath held her mind already working through the numbers. Somewhere down the corridor, a string quartet ran through scales, the notes rising and falling, oblivious to everything. She looked at the name on the page again. She looked at the closed door. She looked back at the page. She understood in that moment exactly whose money had paid for the tuxedo, reflected 3 times over in that mirror. The card wasn't Preston's. It never had been. It belonged to the brother he'd banned from the wedding, the same brother he'd mocked in that lobby weeks earlier. His credit card number had found its way into every invoice she'd processed since. Sarah didn't walk into the suite. She didn't say a word. She turned quietly and walked back toward the front desk instead. Her pulse pounded loud in her own ears. The clipboard felt heavier in her hands than it had 5 minutes earlier. She had a choice in front of her now, one nobody had trained her to make. She could tell someone. She could tell the bride, the family, the venue manager, anyone at all. Or she could stay quiet. She could keep filing receipts, keep printing extra copies, keep folding them into her cardigan pocket at the end of every shift. She chose the second option. She told herself it wasn't her place. She told herself Preston's family was his own business. The venue's job was to execute the contract, not police a client's finances. She didn't fully believe either excuse. She kept the receipts anyway, tucked away safe, waiting for a day she couldn't yet name. Back inside the suite, Preston straightened his jacket one final time. He admired the way the fabric caught the light. He didn't notice the pause outside his door. He didn't notice the clipboard or the footsteps retreating down the hall. He noticed nothing beyond the reflection smiling back at him, from 3 separate angles. "To a self-made life," he said to no one practicing the line he planned to deliver at the reception in 6 days. He said it twice more. He adjusted the emphasis each time, chasing a version that sounded effortless. He never once considered that the phrase might not survive contact with the truth. He never considered it. Somewhere behind him, down a quiet hallway, a woman with a locked desk drawer already knew exactly how self-made he wasn't. He was dressed like royalty. He admired himself from every angle in a room full of mirrors. He was standing directly on top of a trapdoor. He couldn't see it. He had no idea it was already open beneath his rented shoes.
Can you believe it? Preston upgrades the reception to a $150,000 platinum package using a stolen corporate card. If that were me, I would have frozen the account immediately. Imagine watching your own brother blindly spend himself into a federal indictment. The audacity is unreal.
The ceremony lawn smelled like roses and warm champagne. 300 white chairs sat in perfect rows. They faced an arch wrapped in the same imported orchids Sarah had approved 2 weeks earlier. A string quartet played something soft and expensive. The notes drifted over guests dressed in silk and pressed linen. Preston Whitlock walked down the aisle like a man accepting an award nobody had actually voted him. He nodded to relatives on both sides. His chin stayed high, his shoulders stayed back. A smile stayed locked into place for the cameras trailing him from 3 angles. Somewhere behind him, an usher whispered that the florist bill alone could have covered a semester of college. Nobody said it out loud. Preston wouldn't have cared if they had. He reached the arch. He turned slow, deliberate, savoring the moment. He waited for his bride, standing with the posture of a man who believed the entire morning existed to showcase him. 3 miles away, Marcus Whitlock sat in the same dark server room. 3 monitors glowed against the same worn walls. He hadn't slept much the night before. He didn't need to. He had spent the last several hours doing something quieter than sleep. He tracked the geolocation pings from every credit card terminal registered to the venue one by one, mapping each against a floor plan he'd requested through channels nobody at that wedding would ever think to check. Terminal 1, reception desk. Terminal 2, bar east wing. Terminal 3, catering station back of house. Each ping confirmed a location. Each location confirmed a target. Marcus worked through them methodically, the way he approached everything patient exact, without a single wasted motion. His phone sat beside the keyboard screen, cracked, waiting patient, silent, ready. At 10:41 a.m., the ceremony began. Marcus watched it on a secondary feed. The venue's own live stream muted the vows scrolling past as captions instead of sound. He didn't need to hear them. He'd read enough of his brother's promises over the years and knew already how little they were worth. The bride said her vows first. Her voice caught once genuine, real enough that Marcus paused the feed for exactly 3 seconds before pressing play again. Preston said his next. Confident, rehearsed every pause, landing exactly where he'd clearly practiced it landing. Marcus closed the live stream window. He opened the encrypted app instead, the one with no name, no icon. It was a blank gray thread that had carried 2 years of careful, quiet work. He typed a single word, the only authorization Eleanor Voss had told him she would ever need. Green. He sent it. He didn't add anything else. He didn't need to. The reply came back in under a minute. Received. Team moving. Marcus set the phone down, calm, steady, unshaken. He didn't feel triumphant. He didn't feel much of anything he could easily name. There was only a kind of stillness that had been building for weeks. It settled into place now like a key sliding home in a lock built specifically for it. Outside the venue, 4 unmarked vans pulled off the main road. They eased into a service lane behind the caterer's entrance. Nobody at the ceremony noticed. The string quartet kept playing. The guests kept smiling. Preston kept standing at the altar, certain every eye in the crowd belonged to him and only him. What none of them knew was something else entirely. Sarah Malone's locked desk drawer held a growing stack of receipts folded and refolded over 3 weeks. That stack had already been quietly matched name for name, transaction for transaction. It lined up against a federal case file that had existed since the very first charge cleared. Sarah hadn't known any of that when she started keeping copies. She had simply followed an instinct she couldn't name. It was the same instinct that made her keep the intake form. It was the same instinct that made her flip back to a brother's name written in handwriting Preston probably didn't even remember writing. Without ever meaning to, she had spent 3 weeks building an evidence file. She had no idea how complete it already was. Marcus stood up from his chair for the first time in hours. He stretched his back stiff from sitting. He walked to the small window near the server room's only working outlet, the one that looked out onto an alley instead of a street. He didn't need to watch the venue. He would know soon enough what was happening there. He always did. He had built his whole career on knowing things before anyone else did. Preston, at that exact moment, was leaning in for the kiss that would end the ceremony. He felt certain the loudest sound of the day would be applause. He believed it completely the way he believed most things without a single moment of doubt. He had no idea sirens were already closer than the applause. They were gaining patient arriving right on schedule, timed to a moment he could never have predicted and would never see coming. The vows were fake. The smiles were fake too, every one of them rehearsed for cameras that would never capture what was actually happening beneath the surface. But the approaching sirens closing in from 4 directions at once were about to become the only real thing left in that entire beautiful borrowed morning. The ballroom dripped in crystal and white linen. Chandeliers threw soft gold light across 300 place settings. Each one had been arranged with a precision that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Roses climbed the centerpieces in tight imported clusters. Champagne moved from tray to hand to mouth in an endless glittering circuit. Preston Whitlock stood at the head table, glass raised. Applause started before he even finished his sentence. "To a self-made life," he said, the same line he'd rehearsed alone in front of 3 mirrors, delivered now to 200 guests who believed every word of it. "To the people who never doubted me." The room erupted. Glasses clinked. Someone whistled from the back. 3 miles away, Marcus Whitlock sat alone in the dark. He watched all of it through the venue's own live stream feed. The sound stayed turned down low. It was low enough that Preston's voice came through thin and tinny, stripped of whatever warmth the room believed it carried. He didn't turn the volume up. The cracked phone sat beside his keyboard screen, dark waiting. He glanced at it once. It was the way a man glances at an old photograph, one he no longer needs to study closely to remember. He had carried that phone through 2 years of nights exactly like this one. He wondered briefly whether any of it had actually been worth carrying. On the screen, his mother laughed at something the best man said. His aunt dabbed at her eyes, moved to tears by a toast built entirely on stolen money. Cousins he hadn't spoken to in years raised their glasses toward Preston. This was the same man who had banned his own brother from the room for the crime of looking poor in photographs. Marcus sat with that for a long moment. He didn't reach for anything. He didn't type anything. He simply watched his family celebrate the person who had spent his entire life making sure Marcus knew exactly where he stood. A question moved through him, quiet, unwelcome. It was the kind of question that arrives uninvited at moments like this one. Had he done the right thing staying silent for weeks? Had he done the right thing letting all of this happen instead of stopping it the moment the first charge came through? He could have declined the card in the beginning. He could have ended it before the wedding. He could have ended it before the vows, before his mother's tears over a marriage funded by fraud she would never fully understand. He hadn't stopped it. He had let it run patient exact because patience was the only weapon he had ever fully trusted. Sitting alone in a room that smelled like stale coffee instead of roses, Marcus felt something settle over him. It was the full weight of what silence had cost him. Not the money, never the money. What it had cost him was every version of a family that might have looked at him differently. That version existed only if he had shouted instead of waited. He watched Preston set his glass down, still smiling, still certain the entire world existed to admire him. At 8:52 p.m., a new notification crossed Marcus's second monitor. It was separate from the encrypted thread tied instead to the venue's own payment system he had mirrored weeks earlier. The final catering balance had come due. $41,912, submitted for processing, card ending in 4471. The screen blinked. Processing. Marcus watched the little wheel spin slow, deliberate. It was the last transaction of a very long con about to either clear or collapse. He didn't know in that exact moment which outcome would hurt more. If it cleared, the celebration would continue exactly as it had all evening, oblivious, glittering, cruel in ways none of them would ever recognize as cruelty. If it failed, everything Marcus had built for 2 years would finally surface. Every person laughing in that ballroom would learn all at once. They would learn precisely what kind of family they had chosen to become. Either way, Marcus understood something he hadn't let himself fully feel until tonight. He would still be the brother who wasn't invited. He would still be the one who stood in that lobby weeks ago. He had absorbed insult after insult without flinching, while everyone he loved decided his silence made him weak instead of strong. He looked at the cracked phone again. 2 years old. 2 years of nights like this one building something nobody in that ballroom knew existed. He didn't know yet what would come of it. He didn't know whether justice would feel like peace. It might simply replace one kind of hollow with another. He only knew the spinning wheel was the closest thing to hope he had left tonight. It was small, uncertain, still turning. The wheel kept spinning. Somewhere behind it, a decision was already being made. Neither Marcus nor Preston could stop it now, no matter how the next few seconds landed. Whatever came next, it was already in motion, and no amount of applause in that ballroom could slow it down. He raised no glass of his own. He offered no toast. But in a dark room 3 miles from the celebration, a quiet man kept watching. He waited for the exact moment his brother's perfect night would finally completely come undone. The card terminal blinked red before anyone in the room understood what red meant. Preston tapped the screen again, certain of a glitch, certain of nothing else. The clerk beside him did not move. He tapped a third time harder, as if force could argue with a database. "Try it again," Preston said. He did not look at Sarah. He looked at the terminal, at the small red word, declined, sitting there like an insult he refused to read twice. "It's a corporate card. It doesn't decline." Sarah picked up the machine. Her fingers were steady, deliberately steady, visibly steady in a way that made the shaking underneath more obvious. She swiped the card. The screen blinked once, then locked entirely, then displayed a single line of text that was not a decline code at all. "Contact issuing bank immediately." Preston's smile did not fall so much as slide slow and unwilling off a face that had been holding it up all night. "That's a system error," he said. His voice had lost its rehearsed polish. "Bank's glitch. Systems glitch. This is a 5-star venue, not some corner bodega." Sarah said nothing. She had said nothing for weeks, quietly, carefully filing away every receipt with his stolen name printed at the top. Tonight she was done being quiet. She set the clipboard on the counter, and the small sound of it landing felt louder than it should have. "Preston." His new father-in-law had drifted closer, champagne still in hand, his patience thinning by the second. "What's going on?" "Nothing." Preston laughed short and brittle. "The bank's it's a processing thing. It happens with big transactions. They flag it for review, and then they unflag it. It takes a minute." He had never once in 9 years of family gatherings sounded unrehearsed. He sounded unrehearsed now. The ballroom doors opened at the far end wide and unhurried, the way doors open when the people walking through them already know they will not be stopped. 6 agents entered first. Dark jackets, no urgency in their stride because urgency was no longer required. Behind them walked a woman in a charcoal blazer with a federal badge clipped at her hip, gleaming under the crystal chandeliers like it had been designed to be seen from across a room. The band stopped playing before anyone told them to. Eleanor Voss crossed the ballroom floor without asking permission from a single guest in her path. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The silence did that work for her. Preston Whitmore. Her tone was flat, procedural, entirely uninterested in the wedding around her. Federal Bureau of Investigation, you're going to want to step away from that terminal. Preston laughed again, thinner this time, a sound with nowhere left to go. This is a private event, he said. You can't just... I can. She did not blink. The card you've been using since the rehearsal dinner belongs to a federal cybersecurity contractor. Every charge you authorized has been logged, time-stamped, and cross-referenced with wire fraud statute violations. Tonight makes $40,000 in a single attempted transaction. Sarah stepped forward. In her hands was the stack she had been building for weeks, receipt after receipt, each one a small, quiet, patient piece of evidence. She placed it on the counter in front of Eleanor Voss without a word, and the sound of paper meeting marble seemed to travel the length of the ballroom. Preston's mouth opened. Nothing organized came out. I didn't... He stopped. Started again. It was a gift. My brother gave me... He offered... He said, take it. He said... He stopped a second time. Something in his own sentence had caught him, tangled him, tripped him on its way out. He heard it the moment it left his mouth. Everyone else heard it too. He never offered you anything, Eleanor Voss said. Did he? It was not a question. Preston did not answer it as one. His bride had gone pale near the cake table, one hand pressed flat against her chest, watching the man she had married 5 hours ago being read a right to remain silent by a federal agent under a chandelier he had rented in a tuxedo. He had rented at a party funded entirely by a brother he had banned from the guest list for being too poor to photograph well. This is insane, Preston said, but his voice had thinned into something closer to a plea than a protest. I'm self-made. I built this. I built all of this myself. With whose money? Eleanor Voss asked. Silence answered for him. It was the longest silence of his life, standing in a rented tuxedo in front of everyone he had ever wanted to impress, holding nothing. The agents moved in without waiting for permission a second time. Preston's hands went behind his back. The crowd that had been laughing an hour earlier now stood frozen in silk and champagne, watching the groom's own words get read back to him by a stranger who had clearly heard men like him talk before. Sarah stood by the counter, clipboard empty, now the weight of weeks finally set down. Somewhere 3 miles away, a screen in a dark server room quietly logged the final entry of the night. Preston knelt on the marble in his rented white tuxedo, wrists bound behind him while an agent read him rights. He was too stunned to fully absorb. The music had not started again. Nobody had asked it to. His bride stood several feet away, both hands over her mouth, mascara beginning to run in 2 thin lines she did not bother to wipe. Her father had already stepped back from him physically, deliberately, the way a man steps back from something he no longer wants his name attached to. This is a misunderstanding, Preston said. His voice cracked on the last word. Nobody in the ballroom moved to correct him, and nobody moved to comfort him either. I can explain. You already did, Eleanor Voss said. She did not look at him when she said it. She was watching Sarah hand a second folder to one of the agents, then organize 3 weeks of quiet labor bound together with a single black clip. 41 transactions, $150,200, all routed through a Tier 1 corporate account belonging to a federal cybersecurity contractor named Marcus Whitmore. The name landed on the room like a dropped glass. Preston's head came up. Marcus doesn't have that kind of clearance, he said. It came out small, almost childish, the protest of a boy who still believed the world owed him one more explanation before it collected. He fixes computers. He's nobody. He wrote the fraud detection algorithm your card triggered the moment you swiped it for a wedding cake, Eleanor Voss said. He's been watching every dollar you spent since Chapter 1 of Your Own Greed. You didn't steal from a broke IT guy, Mr. Whitmore. You stole from the man who built the system that catches people exactly like you. Somewhere near the back of the ballroom, one of the groomsmen who had spent the night bragging about Preston's crypto fortune quietly set down his glass and walked toward the exit without a word. 3 miles away in a server room that smelled faintly of cold coffee and warm hardware, Marcus watched the live feed on his second monitor. He did not smile. He did not need to. He reached over and picked up his phone, the same cracked screen he had carried through every insult, every uninvitation, every mocking photo sent to a family group chat that had never once asked where he was. He typed a single word to Eleanor Voss. Confirmed. Then he logged off, closed the laptop, and sat for a long moment in the quiet hum of machines that had never once judged him for his clothes. Back in the ballroom, agents were walking Preston toward the doors past tables of untouched filet mignon and a 3-tier cake that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. Guests parted for him the way they had once parted to let him through as the golden child, except now the parting carried no admiration in it, only the instinct to not be standing too close when the story broke online. His bride finally spoke. "You told me you were self-made," she said. Her voice shook, but it held. "You told everyone that." Preston opened his mouth. Nothing self-made came out of it. He had used that phrase in his toast 4 hours earlier. Chin-high champagne raised, mocking a brother who was at that exact moment 3 miles away building the case that would end him. The word had meant triumph then. It meant nothing now except the exact shape of the lie he had built his entire adult life on. Sarah stood by the counter as they led him past her, the same counter where she had watched the terminal blink red for the first time. She did not gloat. She did not need to. She had spent 3 weeks documenting a truth nobody else in this family wanted to see, and now the truth was walking itself out the front door in handcuffs, past a wedding cake nobody would ever cut. "Thank you," Eleanor Voss said to her, quiet enough that only Sarah heard it. Not everyone would have kept the receipts. "I almost didn't," Sarah admitted. "I told myself it wasn't my business." She looked toward the doors where Preston had just disappeared into the night, into a federal vehicle, into a decade he had not yet finished imagining. It became my business the second I realized whose name was actually on that card. By the following week, the toxic hierarchy that had ruled every family gathering for a decade had nowhere left to stand. The relatives who had laughed at Marcus's absence found themselves without a golden child to orbit, without a performance to applaud, without anyone left willing to fund the illusion. Preston faced federal wire fraud charges carrying up to 10 years a number that had been building quietly transaction by transaction since the moment he photographed a card he was never meant to touch. Marcus never issued a statement. He never needed to. He went back to his server room, back to his cracked phone, back to the quiet work of catching people who assumed silence meant weakness. He had let his brother dig every inch of his own grave one swipe at a time. And in the end, the only voice that mattered in that ballroom belonged to a woman with a badge reading his brother's real name out loud for everyone to hear.
This story is fiction, but Marcus's unbreakable patience is a masterclass in quiet power. I have to admit, I struggle to stay silent when my own family disrespects me. Have you ever let someone dig their own grave without saying a word? Subscribe and hit the bell.